Firstly, let's talk about what we absolutely know. Let's talk about the figures since 1980, because we've got figures in terms of Scotland's budget and UK borrowing and Scotland's financial position back to 1980. They're published in something called the Government Expenditure and Revenue Statement for Scotland. So these are published, verified figures. There's no argument about the past. And then we'll talk a bit about the future. In the years since 1980, Scotland, on average, has had a small budget surplus, about 0.3%. The UK, on average, in these years since 1980, has been over 3% in debt each year, 3% in borrowing of total gross national income each year. And that's just what's happened. If Scotland had been independent back in 1980, rather like Norway, we wouldn't be looking at an accumulated national debt at the present moment. We'd have a considerable surplus. Norway has a gigantic oil fund that they've built up over that period of time. Much more recently, actually, didn't start paying into it until the late 1990s. And so they are the most credible, credit-worthy country on earth because they put aside some of their natural resources. If you ask somebody in Norway how long is your oil and gas going to last, the answer is forever, because they've got £450 million for a country of less than 5 million people in a national pension fund, as they call it. And the interest on that and the earnings on that are actually greater than their oil revenues every year. So their oil and gas will last forever. So that's what would have happened. And the UK, as you rightly say, sir, has built up enormous amounts of national debt over the period. Now, I can't really do much about the last 34 years. I mean, that's been and gone, except for this, of course, that as we become independent, the basis on which we'll accept a responsibility, as we should, for part of that borrowing that the UK has undertaken, is if we are also entitled to a share of the assets. And if the UK ministers keep saying, oh, well, we're going to be the continuing state and Scotland will be a new state with none of these assets, then, of course, it follows, as night follows day, that we're not party to the liabilities either. Now, in the White Paper, we've put forward a formula where we share assets and share liabilities. But the real issue is about what we do with the future. Do we do as they've done in the last 34 years, or do we do things differently and better? And I think we should marshal the and human resources of Scotland so as we have a better, more sustainable attitude to national finances. And this brings us on to the lady's question. You say, what about the things that the UK government spends in Scotland? We pay for these things at the present moment. We pay through our taxation, our share of their spending. And if you do the accounts, last 5 years, then the relative surplus in Scotland compared to the UK has been £12 billion. That's more than £2,000 a head for every man, woman and child in the country. So if that £12 billion, if Scotland had been independent over the last 5 years, we could have invested more in the economy, not had the cutbacks on capital spending, invested more in the colleges, for example. Or alternatively, we could have done that and borrowed less, which would have been a good idea because the UK has been borrowing so much. So our position is relatively stronger. Does that mean, it's going to be a land of free taps? Hot, cold and whiskey, or whiskey, oil and water, perhaps? No. But we'll have challenges to meet. We'll have things that we've got to overcome. We've got things we've got to do better. And the lady actually mentioned one of them. Like all European countries, Scotland has a population that's getting older on average. Actually, we're also, for the next few years, in a better position than the rest of the UK. The dependency ratio, as it's called, of working folk to the rest of the population, that's better in Scotland and will be at least until 2030 than it is at the UK as a whole. But, we don't have to just sit back and say, shall we let our population get older? Why don't we have to do that? Well, how about the young folk that leave Scotland because they can't get a job opportunity? Can we not help them to stay in Scotland so that they stay instead of leave? And how about young skilled folk who come from around the world to study in our universities? And we spend 4 or 5 years educating, building up their human capital. And most of these folk want to work in our country with the skills they acquire. And currently, the UK government sends them away, won't let them work, despite the fact they've built up skills, been educated by us. Why wouldn't we do that as well? So we don't have to sit back and say we're just going to allow the population to get older. We can change that. But to change that, we have to have the ability to create work for our own people, and we've got to have the sense of realising that just as Scots have gone round the planet The latest count I had for first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation Scots around the planet is 90 million of people who say they're of Scots descent and made such a success of so many countries. Let's see if we can allow people to help us do the same, and let's allow some of these people to find that career in their own country as opposed to having to go. If people want to travel the world, then that's fine by me. That's part of the benefits of the modern world. But they should have the choice if they want to stay and pursue a career in their own country.